Greetings and welcome to another Lessons with Odin. This episode I'm going to show you all about Viking knit. I'm doing a gift and I figured I might as well do it for a video anyway. So this project is just another wire working thing that you can do. Similar to wire crochet, this is wire knitting. So if you're familiar with crocheting and hand knitting techniques, you might be pretty familiar with this. I learned from a book. I'm not even sure if this is in print anymore. I'll go check. But I learned from Great Wire Jewelry, Irene from Peterson. I don't know if that's their author's full name or whatever. It's an old book from Lark from 1998. And it's not the greatest. I was able to manage, especially with the chainmail. But with a lot of the Viking knit things, it's mostly like one of those things where like it shows you the project and then you have to go to like page 122 to find the actual directions or the reference photo. It's a lot of jumping around and I don't know how I manage. But, alright, for this project you're going to need a bunch of random bullshit. Good news is a lot of it you might have on hand already. If not, you can always DIY it as well. So let's talk wire. The initial weaving wire, you can go anywhere from 24, 26 gauge, to even down to these really thin wires like 28. I even have a 32 up here that I have yet to do anything with, but whenever I get around to it, yeah, here it is. I have a 32 gauge wire that I plan on doing this with one of these years. For me, personally, 26 is the sweet spot. You can do it in whatever color you want. But keep in mind, on the copper-coated ones, since things are going to be rubbing together a lot, some finishes might scratch off. Now, you'll need 22 gauge or 20 gauge in order to finish it off and to do the end cones on the opposite side, which, speaking of, you will need end cones. I'll talk a little bit more later after the wire. And then you'll need some sort of scrap wire to kind of start the initial wraps. 24 to 22 gauge is great, so it's very flexible. And it doesn't really, you're not using it, so it doesn't matter what color, it doesn't matter what gauge. If you've got some really shitty wire in your standpoint, that is what you'll need. So again, for the bracelet itself, or whatever jewelry component you're going to use, you're going to need some end cones to hide the nasty bits in the bottom, and to thread on something to use as a jewelry device. So jump rings and a clasp is generally pretty good. End cones, end caps, I found, especially for this specific bracelet, I'm going to be using ones that have an inner diameter of about 8 to 10 millimeters. So that's kind of what you're going to be looking for on the inside for your end cones. Then there is all the equipment bullshit. You will need an assortment of pliers. I just have what I have on hand. You will for sure need a cutter. You will need some sort of round nose plier, and I have a couple of flat nose or chain nose pliers just to kind of pry things around. But to get the job done and pry things even better, I recommend T-pins. Shout out to my quilters out there. You will also need a stick. I have done this on the back of a marker and a pencil. I have also done it, I think this is a quarter inch dowel, I think. I don't know, I found it on my floor and I'm using it. So that is what I have there. Fairly small-ish. You're going to shrink it down later. This book recommends an Allen wrench set and a vise, but I don't have that kind of setup. So I got around with a dowel. This is something that's kind of a pain in the ass, but you need draw plates. I got these fancy ones from Beadsmith because I tried cheaping out on it. And all I ended up with, let me see if I can even have that one anymore. I don't think I even do. It was something small made out of wood, and it just had these small ones, and that is completely useless to me, considering how wide this stuff gets. Although, when I first started doing this, I had this Shatton size chart from Art Beads that they sent me a long time ago that I used. And it worked pretty well until I got to the, smaller bits, where you can kind of see how much chunks have been taken out. That's when I decided I needed to buy an official one. I'll leave a link to where you can get this one. It was $10 on Amazon. Beadsmith, it came in a pack of 2 with these giant holes. in it, the one I got was like a chunk of wood, and it was so small, and it was just, I think I got it on Fire Mountain, and I'm like, what do you need this kind of draw plate for? Because you can't really use it for any, like, metalworking that, where the metal is hot, because that's going to smolder the draw plate. But anyway, you can probably also DIY these if you have the drill sets already handy to you, where you have, like, all of the millimeter lengths, but, you know, it's $10, free shipping if you have Prime, whatever. You also need some sort of flat-ish device that's larger than a ruler, or a very wide ruler. I say this because whenever I've wrapped something on a ruler, it's not large enough for me to manipulate. I'm going to be using my MP3 player because that worked last time, so why not do it again? Something about probably 2 inches wide. You could take like a stack of index cards, a credit card, something that you don't want to, that you don't care about, because we're going to be wrapping the wire around that, but you need something so that we can start the initial loops. Alright. With that all being said, let us get started. So I'm going to cut a length of my shitty scrap wire. In my case, it's 24 gauge, this green stuff. I cut about a wingspan worth, because it's always to have more than less in this case. So I'm just going to wrap it around my thingy, anywhere between 4 to 6 times. You can go more if you want, if your stick can handle it wrapped around. Basically, the more wraps you have, the wider your bracelet is going to be. But for beginning, I'd start with either 5 or 6. So I have 2, 3, 4, 5, and I will go 1 more. And I have a lot of extra, so probably 3 feet is a good range, unless you have like a really wide thing that you're wrapping this on. So again, I'm going to cut here, because it's better to have more than less. I'm going to slide that off. Now comes a little bit of a tricky part. I'm going to squish these down so that they're kind of flat. And our goal is to kind of keep these somewhat even on the ends, because we're going to work with the loops at the end. So if you have a spot, I'm going to take something thin, like a screwdriver, and kind of flatten them so that they're on top of this, so they're kind of even. And flush with that end, then I'm going to twist it around a few times, so that everything stays nice in place. I have a nice little handhold thing. There we go. I end up with a thingy that looks like this. Since these ends on the opposite side are just kind of flailing around, I'm just going to snip them short, just so that I'm not getting stabbed with them. Now, I'm going to pick at these apart and kind of twist them around until I form a circle, a flower thingy, all the way around. And we go, so we end up with something like that. Then I'm going to take my stick, push it, and wrap it around so that all the petals get tightly secured around the stick. If I need more tension, I'm just going to loosen up the twists and kind of pull them down. Now I'm going to take my weaving thread. This is my 26 gauge copper in this instance, and I'm going to do something that's comfortable. Probably like a wingspan, nothing more than that, otherwise your wire is going to get kinked all over the place. And just cut a length of that. Then I'm going to lay the end on top and twist it around just to secure it, and so that I end up on top of the cap. Going to put my stick in again. We are going to be working in between, so our stitch is going to start between these two, between these two, between these two, etc. So I've got my end of my wire in my hand. The wrap is coming down and over. All I'm going to do is loop through behind 2 petals, so that when I pull down, a loop starts to form between the 2. Now, you're probably going to get familiar with this site. All of these kinks, don't worry about them. You can unbend them with your chain nose pliers and just kind of fix the shape a little bit, just squish things around till it's flatter and more workable. Now I'm going to rotate and go behind the next set of 2 petals, take my weaving wire, go behind 2 of them, and pull down. This is where my kink's going to happen, if you kind of see how this, so we just kind of finger and bend that back in place so that it behaves. Pull down, pull those together so that it forms another loop. Like that. Going to wrap around to our next petal, and it's going to look a right mess in the initial stage. That's fine. So, between my next petals, I'm going to take my weaving wire, pass them back around in between the 2 petals, pull until we form another loop, rotate, take our weaving wire between 2 petals, pull down to form a loop, rotate. I'm rotating the stick, not the wire. Well, I should be rotating the stick, not the wire, but you know. Go back in between the back 2 petals to form another loop. Rotate. Go back in between 2 petals. Make sure I don't get more kinks in here. And pull. Now we're at our starting stitch. Again, since this stitch isn't really the greatest example, it's going to be all squished in anyway, I'm just going to go around the 2 that I started from again, just to make it all nice and happy. Now I'm ready to begin my next row. That is 1 row completed. Now, to start the next one, all I'm going to do is, now on our copper, what I'm going to do is just pick up the loop of copper. We're going to ignore the petals and just go behind that loop. If you're having problems getting back there, you can take a T-pin and just kind of go underneath and pull it forward. Just pick up the loop, pull it forward, so that you can slide your weaving thread in better. Pull that down. And now you will have started a new stitch. We're going to work around, go behind just the copper at the intersection on the loop, go around, and turn it, go behind our copper loop, pull again, rotate, go down behind the copper, pull through till we form a loop, go again, behind, pull through. Now we're at our first stitch. I am just going to pick up the second one here to complete our row. Now, tension is very important when it comes to making this not a pain in the ass. You don't want to pull too tight so that everything cinches together and that you can't loop back through anything again. And you don't want to keep it too loose, otherwise the weave isn't going to stick and it's going to be very uneven and it's just not going to be very happy. So basically what you want to do is you want to pull each stitch until they match about the same size as the stitch before. So like here, it's going to look a little bit similar. And you can see how the size of the connections are a little bit the same. So always be cautious of your tension. Not too tight, not too loose. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter how it looks when you're weaving it. You can fix it and fidget it and push things around. But ultimately, when you pass things through the draw plate, it looks just fine. So don't stress too much, especially if this is like the first one you're doing. Don't stress over what you've made. It'll work out. It'll be shiny and it'll be fun. Now, this is it. this is the entire Viking knit stitch. All you do is, if to continue on in my next row, I would go behind the copper, loop around, turn it around, go behind the intersection, go around all the way down till you move to a new stitch. And since we're at our new row, I'm dropping down the second one. As you build more, there will be a third one, a fourth one, and so forth. You just keep building down. Now, if I continued in this same exact manner, this is what's called the single Viking knit. There is also the double and the triple. So, in my opinion, the double is the best of both worlds of having a nice, aesthetically pleasing weave and not being as much a pain in the ass. Because the double simply means we're going back 2 instead of 1. So, for example, in single, I would just go behind the next one that we've added. But in double, what I'm going to do is count back 2 and go behind the second one. Behind here, pull through, and move on. You can kind of see how the weave wants to go a little bit tighter up against the weave. Moving on to our next stitch, I go count up 1, 2, go behind the copper on the second stitch. Make sure you don't have too many kinks in your wire as you're pulling through. And that is number 2. Rotate, go behind the second one, not pulling too tight, so you can kind of adjust. Where'd that green come from? You can adjust your tension, rotate, go behind the second one, pull through, rotate. I think I'm going to have some trouble there, so we're going to kind of pull through and loosen the stitch behind. Go back behind 2, pull through, pull my stitches back, go back behind 2, and that is the end of this row. As you get used to your tension, you won't even need to pull stitches back, but this is a good thing to have on hand. Now, to continue our next stitch, for double, this is a new row. I'm going to count 1, 2, and go behind number 2 and number 3. We are all done with the stitch number 1 on top. So we pull that around, and that's how our next stitch looks. So, rotate, 1, 2, I count back 2, thread through, and pull, rotate, 1, 2, pull through, like that, rotate, count back 1, 2, go behind, pull through, and rotate. 1, 2, go behind, and rotate. Now we're back to our start. We go 1, 2, pull through and rotate, and so forth. That is how you do double. Now to do triple, instead of going back 2, you start making 3 of the single stitches, then you count back 1, 2, 3, and go through 3 stitches instead of just 2. Now I'm not going to go too much into detail with single or triple, but if you'd like me to do so, leave a comment in the description and I can go over the single and the triple in more detail. But continue on with the double as you see fit until you run out of your weaving thread. So as you're weaving down, there's a couple of troubleshooting things that you might encounter. You might find that your channels between 2 stitches get too narrow, and how you fix that is you basically add slack when you are stitching between this area. So as you're going around, you make your stitch a little bit larger. You can kind of see how I've looped around a bit wider. If you're finding it's becoming too wide, you can also pull the stitch and decrease the tension. You can see how I've got these two stitches that are really close together. You can kind of pull them and direct them. The goal is to kind of make them even into a straight line, but it doesn't always happen. You can see in this other stitch how I've tried and failed to keep it in a nice line. It just doesn't happen until you get a hand of the tension in the weave, but that's just some things to keep in mind, and it's just a experimentation set. So now we're going to get into ending your weaving threads or wires. I'm so used to threads, I don't do wire work very much. So I've got a small tail on here. I can't really do any further. I could if I really wanted to, but I just don't feel like getting the arthritis. So I've just finished a weave around, and instead of going to my next stitch, I am just going to cut the wire short. Then I'm going to kind of tuck that wire around so that it doesn't catch and it doesn't get undone. So I'm just kind of push it in so that your edge is kind of tucked under and under the previous stitch. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, it's not going to come loose unless you're like doing something really dramatic to it. When you weave it through the draw plate, it's not going to be a big deal, and it's going to kind of hold itself in place. So what you will do is cut a new wire. I'm using this one just because, one, I have it on hand, two, it's a different color. And I'm going to take my round nose pliers and take one end and kind of form a hook or a round like this so that I can weave it in my thread. Now, I have to pay attention to the direction that my weave goes. My weave is going this way in the counterclockwise direction, so I need my thread to go in the counterclockwise direction. So I am going to go back 3 stitches since this is the one that we've added. So I'm going to take my loop, I'm going to count back the 3 strands between the last stitch that I've done. I'm going to hook my wire behind those 3 stitches so that it catches here. I'm going to rotate it so that it goes above and covers the next 2 stitches. Then I'm going to take whatever tools I have to kind of tuck that short edge down so that it goes behind the stitch underneath here. So I'm just going to push, I'm going to kind of feed it around and then pull this down behind the stitch that I am working at, so that it gets kind of hidden, and you don't want things to be overlapping. So that is good enough, and from here you should have anchored your new stitch. So be gentle with your newest stitch until you have it in place. So I'm just going to go continue my double. I count 2 stitches, pull my thread through, and go around till I have my new stitch, rotate, do my next stitch, and so forth. And I would have added my new weaving wire. So that's how you end them and continue them on. You're going to keep on doing that until you have the length that you need. Now, there's math kind of involved with that, although I try to avoid it. Generally, depending on how tight or loose your stitches are, the Viking knit weave will add about 20 to 30% after you've taken it through a draw plate, like so. So, this is going to be about a 6.5 to 7 inch bracelet that I want. I have about 4.5 inches of weave completely done. I also need to take into consideration the length of the clasp and how much the end cones are going to stick out, how much they're going to add, and how much they're going to take away from the top of the cone. So, for a 7.5 inch bracelet, I usually go between 5.5 to 6 inches. because the longer the weave, the better. It's a very big pain in the ass to try and add to it after it's been drawn through the plate like this. So the longer the better, because you can always cut it down and fix it there. So, since this is going to be about a 7-inch bracelet, I have about 4.5 inches of weave. I'm going to add an end cone to it, and so forth. Then is the fun and satisfying part of drawing this through your draw plate. One thing I forgot to mention is, as you're working your weave, don't forget you can choke up the weave on your stick, and this will be a testament to how much your tension mastery is, because if you have a really hard time pulling this off the stick, your tension is too tight. So, keep that in mind. Don't have tight tension. So you pull that off your stick, you're left with raw, unfinished weave. Then we just kind of go through the circles. You can kind of stick it in and see how it fits. Doesn't fit there. It doesn't fit there. It kind of fits there. So I'm going to go through, and from the end, I just stuff it through. I take a pair of pliers, and I draw it through a few times, just to make the final rope the size that this measurement says. So in my example, it's starting off at 13 millimeters. If you have like a rough side and a smooth side, you definitely want to pull from the smooth side down, because you will probably scratch up your piece. So I started with the 13, I'm just going to go down to the 12.5, pull it through a few times, so that it all gets nice and uniform. Go down to the 12. I might need pliers, I might just be able to use my hands. So we draw it through a couple of times, down to the 11.5, pull it through, and down to the 11. Come here. And you just keep doing that. You can see how things are starting to get into a nice uniform tubular shape. You basically draw it until you don't have resistance when you pull it through. And you can also see how the webbing widens. Pulling it through. And it gets way more flexy as you do this. Alright. I am going to stay at the 8mm ring, because that is the size of my end cones, but you can definitely go deeper, especially if a lot of the intersections aren't completely touching. You can kind of see how I still have some room in the weave to pull this through again and make things touch nicely. But since my end cones are in the 8mm size, I'm just going to leave it at that and just kind of rotate it around, have some fun with it. You can also kind of roll it in order to make things a little bit more even if you've got stitches that are a little bit spread apart, like that. You can kind of let it work, like you're rolling out a clay cane, and you have your primed weave segment to work with. So now, this has increased from 4.5 to 6 inches, which is about where I wanted it. So to finish off your piece, what you're going to do is just cut out all of this bullshit. Just cut it out. Got it? And kind of get rid of all of the flashy bits from the junk chain, the starter nub that you made. Then you're going to kind of group this mess together so that it forms a cohesive mass. Get rid of your scrap bundle, because that's a liability. Then you take your 22 or 20 gauge wire, and you sort of bend it around till you have a hook. I have a 1/2 inch around here. you're going to hook around the weave pretty much through and pull. You're going to kind of bend and twist around just so that everything stays nicely in place. Then you're going to thread on your end cone, kind of mash it in place. My end cone is very short. Generally you'll have longer ones, but you're just going to want to pull that. And if your main wire is getting in the way, cut that short, bend it around, twist it. It's wire. It bends, it twists, it does magic. So, shove that around, and we can kind of see how that meets in place. What you'll do is, your options to end are very fun here. You can thread on another crystal or something pretty and shiny over there. Then you will do a wrapped loop to kind of secure everything in place. Twist it around. Now, you can add your clasp with a jump ring, or before you do the wrap, you can add your clasp in order to make it a little bit more secure. Then you cut your end short, and we have our completed end. Possibly a clasp if that's what you decided to do. Then feel free to do that with the other end. You just mash these ends together and thread on another wire and attach your other end cone. And after some unmentionable hours, you will have a finished bracelet. So that is the general basics of the Viking weave. There are right ways and wrong ways to do it. I'm probably doing it in wrong ways, but I like my results. So that is generally the shtick of it. Have fun with this, making it in different colors. There's a lot of options out there for wire colors and coatings, so express yourself. But yes, if you want me to go over single Viking weave and triple Viking weave in greater detail, let me know in the comments down below. But I think that will do it from me. Be sure to like up this video and subscribe if you want to see more bullshit from me. Check out everything I do in the description box below. All of my social media deets are down below, including my website and my books and stuff. All pertinent links will be down below. Thank you to all my patrons for supporting me and my channel on here. If you would like to have extra jewelry making tutorials each month, and to learn to make shiny things such as these, feel free to check out my Patreon page. I will leave links down below. Thank you all so much for joining me, and of course, if there's anything I need to be trying out right now, feel free to let me know down below, and I will see you next time.